So, I mean, I love talking about the history of farming because I think a lot of people don't understand it. Even farming is really what colonized the US, which I think is really fascinating. And it was driven a lot by the railroads as we built even the East Coast Railroad system, but especially when we built the intercontinental railroads, they needed people to populate these areas. And so they actually brought in immigrants from Germany, farmers from Germany, Ireland, all these different areas that were known for farming, and they gave them free farmland. And so when we first started, you know, in the early, or I guess late 1800s, 90% of America were farmers. And so people were very connected to their food. They were very connected to the soil, but it was very cheap. And so we actually, even from that point in time, have been kind of abusing the land. And if we overused it, we could get cheap land right next door. And so on the East Coast, though, we had the start of some, even back then, regenerative farms, and they were very successful. But what ended up happening is the areas where we had the most fertile land also is where we built our cities. So we actually started having this major urban sprawl, and we started having the cities and asphalt and pavement start covering all of our best land, and we moved the farms out to the less fertile land. And then we started over-tilling it and using a lot of farming practices that were actually fairly destructive to try to produce more and more food as fast as we could on less fertile land. And that trend has continued to happen. And, you know, it kind of came to head with the Great Depression, and you had the Dust Bowl, where we ended up in a major food crisis. And at that point, the government kind of took control of the entire farming sector, and setting prices and subsidies and things like that. And that's basically stayed with us. It's really the only industry that's controlled in that sort of a way still to this day. And it's had a major impact on farming across the US, and it's driven a lot of, you know, we subsidize heavily 5 main crops, and most of those are grain crops for meat production. And so if you look at the way things are subsidized in the way that farming's been kind of pushed in that direction, it's major monocropping and heavy tillage. And then in the 50s, more and more chemicals started getting used. And what's happened over that time since the 50s is our soil organic matter has gone from about 11% on average down to about 1%. And soil organic matter is that structure in the soil that builds the soil microbiome up and creates this living ecosystem under our feet. And it's also what helps us retain water. So every 1% of soil organic matter is about 170,000 gallons of water retention per acre. So if you think of California and areas that are in major drought, that are struggling with water, that is one solution for us, is to just build our soil organic matter back up, because then the soil becomes this sponge that holds the water in and allows the plants to take it up into their roots as needed. And then monocropping as well, it's actually destroying a lot of our soil biodiversity, which is really important for the plants, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So that soil organic matter is really important. It's also a major carbon sink. We've lost about 2/3 of our carbon in our soil, so it's one of the best reservoirs to sequester carbon back into the soil and out of the atmosphere. So it's a huge opportunity for climate change. It's probably the biggest one that we have in front of us and the least costly to start reversing climate change. So regenerative farming tries to address all of those things by building that soil organic matter back up. So everything we do is to try to build the soil up. So just a few examples of things we do is we try to keep the ground covered as much as possible, because the soil is also sensitive, and the living organisms in it, to UV light, just like your skin. You want to cover it and protect it. You want to keep, and that also keeps moisture in as well. And we don't till, so as soon as we lay our bed rows, we try not to disrupt that soil again and just continue to build on top of it. And we add a lot of organic matter just to speed up the process with compost, that gives it these rich nutrients, but also starts building up that soil structure. And again, that allows us to have less erosion. We don't have our farm soil running off into the rivers full of chemicals, but we actually are keeping it on our land and building it up. And so those are some of the things that are really important that we focus on our farm, is just how do we build up that soil and build up that biodiversity, because more and more research is now shifting from, you know, you started with the Human Genome Project, which put a lot of funding into understanding the human body and all of the not just our own body, but the other plus 50% of non-human cells that make up our body and our holobiome. And then especially a lot of focus went onto the gut microbiome, and now even linking that to a lot of chronic illness if we don't have a healthy gut microbiome. And some of that research has shifted over to the soil microbiome, which is incredibly similar actually to the gut microbiome. The rhizosphere microbiome, which is where the root base of the plant is so incredibly similar to the gut microbiome. It's like this incredible neural network that holds a lot of the immune system of the plant and has a lot of the nutrient exchange. And, you know, they call the gut now the second brain of the human body. The rhizosphere microbiome, where the root is also like the second brain of the plant. And what we also are finding out is this microbiome is much more involved in even how we express how plants express their genetics. And so that was something even in the human body that is more recently understood on, you know, how we're actually using these organisms as a way to protect against stresses. And if we have fewer of them to pull on, we have less ability to cope with stress. So when we don't have a lot of biodiversity in our soil, a plant also has less ability to cope with stress. So we see, you know, and the other thing that's fascinating with plants is they pass down part of their holobiome from seed to seed. So they have some like heritage knowledge of how to deal with, say, drought. If even 100 years ago, that plant's ancestors had been exposed to drought, they actually can pull on that microbiome and understand how I need to send down deeper roots. I need to send more lateral roots and finer root fibers, which is a way of it expressing its DNA. And so you have to look at it as this overall system now, that it's not just the plant, but it's this whole ecosystem that is allowing that plant to thrive. And what we've been really fascinated about, and what we even focus a little bit in the diet, is also that builds a lot of phytonutrients. So when this rhizosphere microbiome is communicating with the plant, it's telling it, you need to defend against this, create these phytonutrients or phytochemicals in the plant to protect the plant. And when we consume these phytonutrients, we actually get similar stress coping mechanisms in the human body. And so we focus a lot on varieties of crops that are very colorful, and we focus on different phytonutrients, and then we grow them organically. And there's been now extensive studies showing that that is putting the plant through more stress, and it's actually resulting in higher micronutrients, because it's not kind of being pampered in like this perfect environment and giving exact chemicals. It's having to figure out how to cope with that stress and pull from its microbiome all of this knowledge that's in this overall ecosystem. So it's very fascinating. And I think for us, the biggest thing is to look at it in this really holistic way, that it's not just the plant, and it's not just the soil, and it's not just these exact chemicals that we need to add, but we need to allow the holistic system to find balance. Just like the human health and the human body, you got to find balance, and you need to nurture that balance and find ways that you can support it in the soil.